The air in the ceremonial chamber tasted of regret and old magic. Lycan knelt on cold stone, her robes pooling like spilled blood. The grand hall of Shadowmoon Kingdom held the silence that precedes executions. Lycans lined the walls, eyes fixed on her. At the dais sat Elder Arturo and the High Council, their faces carved from judgment. And behind them, on his throne of blackened oak, sat her mate, Alpha Cox, the Lycan King, the male her wolf had chosen. Her mate no longer, though her wolf howled in protest. 6 years, Luna Lycata, Elder Arturo said, unrolling a scroll. 6 years without an heir. The bloodline is ancient, sacred. A kingdom without heirs is condemned to extinction. Lycata felt those years pressing down. Each month of hope, each month of blood and disappointment. I never stopped trying, she whispered, her gaze finding Cox in the shadows. Once, those amber eyes had burned with devotion. Now they reflected only cold calculation. Cox, she said, voice breaking. Tell them we need more time. Something flickered across his features. Regret, perhaps, or memory. Then his jaw tightened, and Lycata felt her heart crack. The mate bond is sacred, Cox said, his voice echoing with ancient law. But a kingdom without heirs is condemned to death. I release you, Lycata. Our bond is severed. The words struck like physical blows. Around the chamber, gasps rose like a dark tide. No, Lycata breathed, you can't. But Elder Arturo was already beginning the severance ritual, his voice rising in the old tongue. Magic slammed into her chest. The bond, that sacred connection between true mates, began to tear. It felt like claws ripping through her ribs, her soul being flayed. Her wolf screamed, thrashing, refusing to accept what had been decreed. He is ours, her wolf snarled. Destiny chose him, but destiny could be overruled by council decree. The bond tore, leaving ragged edges bleeding magic and pain. You are stripped of your title, Elder Arturo declared. Cast out from this kingdom, forbidden to return. Lycata rose on shaking legs. I loved you, she said, her voice carrying to Cox. I loved you with everything I was. He didn't respond, didn't flinch. The guards escorted her out, past assembled Lycans who had once bowed to her. The massive doors slammed shut with tomb-like finality. Cold wind sliced through her robes as she stumbled down the steps, stripped of everything that marked her as Luna. Her wolf raged, refusing acceptance. Go back. Fight. He is ours. But he had chosen his kingdom over her. Lycata walked into the forest, each step taking her from the only home she'd known. Behind her, Shadowmoon's lights faded into darkness. The wilderness stretched before her, hostile, unforgiving, indifferent to her pain. Lycata woke to fire in her veins and ice in her bones. She didn't remember collapsing, didn't remember how long she'd been lying in the frost-covered clearing. Time had become meaningless. Just an endless cycle of pain as the severed bond tried to kill her from the inside. Her wolf thrashed in delirium, howling for a mate who had turned his back, clawing at the ragged edges of the broken connection as if it could force destiny to knit itself back together. The fever dreams were worse than the cold. In them, she saw Cox's face, felt his hands on her skin, heard him whisper promises he already broken. Then different voices cut through the haze. Male, authoritative, close. That's Shadowmoon's mark on her neck, someone said, urgent and weary. We shouldn't get involved, Alpha Grill. She belongs to Cox. She belongs to no one, a deeper voice responded, and Lycata felt strong hands lifting her from the frozen ground. Look at her. Bond severance trauma. If we leave her here, she'll be dead by morning. Cox cast her out for a reason. I don't care about Cox's reasons. The words rumbled through broad chest, and Lycata realized she was being carried, cradled against warmth that her dying body craved desperately. She's dying on my border, and I won't have that blood on my hands. Lycada's wolf stirred, snarling weakly. Wrong, not mate. Wrong scent, wrong touch, wrong. But her human consciousness, drowning in pain and exhaustion, registered something different. Safety, kindness in the way these ards held her, careful not to jostle her broken body. Take her to Elder Paro, the deep voice commanded. Tell him it's bond severance and she needs immediate intervention. No one is to harm her or question her presence. She's under my protection now. The journey to the Blackstone Fortress passed in fragments. Torchlight, stone corridors, worried voices speaking in hushed tones. Then softer hands, gentler touch, a scent of healing herbs filling her lungs. Sleep, child, an elderly voice murmured. You're safe now. But even in sleep, her wolf wouldn't quiet, wouldn't accept the foreign pack scents surrounding them, wouldn't stop reaching for a bond that no longer existed. Days blurred together. Lycada surfaced occasionally to find Elder Paro spooning bitter medicine between her lips, to feel cool cloths on her burning forehead. And always, at some point, the Alpha would appear. Alpha Grill, she'd learned his name was, checking on her progress with eyes that held genuine concern rather than calculation. She's stable, Elder Paro reported during one of these visits. But the bond severance was brutal. Her wolf is fighting the reality of it. Will she survive? Physically, yes. Emotionally. The healer paused. That remains to be seen. Lycada wanted to tell them she could hear every word, wanted to explain that survival felt like a punishment rather than a gift. But her voice wouldn't work, and her wolf's keening drowned out everything else. As consciousness faded again, one thought crystallized through the fever. For the first time in 6 years, someone had chosen to save her without demanding anything in return. It was the strangest feeling she'd ever known. The healing came in increments. First, Lycada could sit up without her vision darkening. Then she could walk the length of her chambers without collapsing. Elder Paro's tonics worked their magic, knitting together what the bond severance had torn apart. At least, the physical wounds. Her wolf remained a snarling, restless presence, pacing the edges of her consciousness like a caged beast. Alpha Grill visited every day. At first, Lycada tensed whenever he entered, expecting demands, expectations, the price for his mercy. But he simply asked how she felt, whether she needed anything, if the pain had lessened. Sometimes he brought books from his library, histories of the ancient packs, poetry that made her throat tight, adventure tales that let her escape into someone else's story. You don't have to keep coming, she said one afternoon, 3 weeks into her recovery. He looked up from the chair beside her window, surprise flickering across his strong features. Do you want me to stop? The honest answer surprised her. No. Something softened in his expression. Then I won't. As winter melted into spring, their conversations deepened. He walked with her through the fortress gardens, steadying her when her legs still trembled, pointing out the first blooms pushing through thawing earth. She told him about Shadow Moon, about the years of trying and failing, about watching Cox's love curdle into obligation, and finally into nothing at all. You deserved better, Will said quietly, and the lack of pity in his voice, just simple truth, made her believe him. She learned about him, too. The weight of leading Blackstone alone after his mate died in childbirth years ago, his fierce loyalty to his pack, the loneliness that came with a crown, even surrounded by hundreds who called him Alpha. I don't feel alone when I'm with you, he admitted one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky crimson. Lycada's heart stuttered. Deep inside, her wolf snarled a warning. Not mate. Never mate. Cox is ours. But her human heart, starved for kindness, aching for someone who saw her as more than a failed vessel, whispered something different. This is real. This is choice. This is love. I feel the same, she said, and watched hope bloom in his eyes. When he asked if she might consider a future with him, slowly, carefully, with no demands, Lycan made a decision that split her soul in two. She reached for his hand, felt his fingers close around hers with gentle strength, and said, "Yes." The kiss that followed was nothing like the explosive, fated connection she'd felt with Cox. It was quieter, deeper, built on weeks of conversation, on respect earned rather than destiny decreed, on the radical act of choosing rather than being chosen. Her wolf rose up in furious rebellion, raking claws against the inside of her ribs. Betrayal, wrong, he is not our eyes. But Lycan held Grill's hand tighter and chose him anyway. For the first time since her exile, she felt hope unfurl in her chest like spring's first flower. She didn't yet understand the price her wolf would demand for this betrayal. The nausea hit Lycan on a cool morning in late spring. She barely made it to a basin before her stomach emptied, leaving her shaking and confused. When it happened again the next day and the day after that, a wild hope seized her chest, the kind of hope she'd buried 6 years ago in Shadowmoon. Elder Paro confirmed it with a gentle smile. "You're with child, Luna. About 8 weeks along." The world tilted. Lycan pressed a hand to her still flat stomach, tears streaming down her face. I'm pregnant?" "Your body was never broken," Elder Paro said softly. "Sometimes the problem isn't the vessel, but the combination that fills it." When she told Grill, he swept her into his arms with a joy so pure, it made her weep harder. The Blackstone Pack celebrated that night. Bonfires and feasting, songs of blessing for their Alpha's coming heir. Lycan stood beside Grill, his hand protective on her waist, and let herself believe in second chances. Her body hadn't failed her. Destiny hadn't condemned her. She could have this. Love, family, a future built on choice rather than fate. Deep inside, her wolf prowled in agitated circles, but Lycan ignored it. She was happy. Finally, blessedly happy. That night, she fell asleep with Grill's arm draped across her middle, his breath warm against her neck. She woke to knives in her abdomen. The pain tore a scream from her throat. Grill bolted upright as Lycan doubled over, cramping so violently he couldn't breathe. Inside her consciousness, her wolf erupted, not in protection, but in violent, savage rejection. "Wrong seed. Not mate's child. Wrong, wrong, wrong." "Lycan!" Grill's voice seemed distant beneath her wolf's howling. "Someone get Elder Paro, now!" Blood. She felt it. Warm and damning, soaking through her nightclothes. Her wolf thrashed like a rabid thing, clawing at the life growing inside her, recognizing it as foreign, as betrayal, as an abomination against the true mate bond. "No," Lycan gasped, trying to fight her own wolf, trying to protect the child she wanted so desperately. "No, please stop." But her body obeyed the wolf, not her will. Elder Paro appeared in a blur of motion, his hands glowing with healing magic, his voice chanting ancient words of protection, but even his power couldn't stop what was happening. Lycan's wolf had made its judgment, and her body, caught between human desire and primal instinct, chose instinct. The hemorrhaging intensified. Pain swallowed everything. Through it all, her wolf's howl echoed in her skull. "Cox is mate. Cox is the only mate. His seed is poison." When it was over, Lycan lay in blood-soaked sheets, empty once more. Grill held her as she sobbed, but even his arms couldn't shield her from the truth crystallizing in her shattered heart. Her wolf had killed their child. Her own body had become her enemy, still loyal to a mate who'd abandoned her, still bound to a destiny she tried to escape. Elder Paro's face was grave in the candlelight. "The bond," he said quietly. "It's not fully severed. Your wolf still recognizes Cox as true mate. It rejected the pregnancy as incompatible." Lycata closed her eye against fresh tears. It was the first miscarriage. It would not be the last. They tried again. Hope, Lycata learned, could be as cruel as destiny itself. The second pregnancy lasted 10 weeks. She spent every day fighting her wolf's agitation, whispering pleas to the life growing inside her, begging her own body not to betray her again. But at 10 weeks, she woke to familiar clamps, familiar blood, familiar howling in her consciousness as her wolf tore away what it deemed unworthy. Grill held her through the aftermath, his own grief carved into the lines of his face. "We can try different suppression methods," Elder Paro said, desperation creeping into his usually calm voice. "Ancient magic to quiet the wolf during pregnancy." The third attempt, fortified by Elder Paro's most powerful spells, made it to 12 weeks. Lycata allowed herself to hope again. Foolish, desperate hope. She felt the tiny flutter of movement, imagined a future where she held her child in her arms. Then her wolf shattered the magical bindings like they were cobwebs. Lycata woke screaming, her wolf rampaging through her consciousness with primal fury. Cox's heir or no heir, destiny cannot be denied. The rejection was more violent this time, the hemorrhaging so severe that Elder Paro feared for Lycata's life as well as the pregnancies. When it was over, Lycata lay hollow and broken, staring at nothing. "I don't understand," Grill said, his voice raw. "Why is this happening?" Elder Paro's ancient text spread across his study, told the story in fragments of forgotten lore. Bond severance, true severance, required both human and wolf consent. Cox had severed the bond legally, but Lycata's wolf, primal, instinctive, utterly loyal to fate's decree, had never accepted it. The wolf still recognized only Cox as true mate, and it would kill any child that didn't carry his bloodline. Lycata's body had become a battlefield, her human will screaming for Grill's child, her wolf savagely rejecting it. And caught between them, doomed before they could even begin, were the lives she desperately wanted to carry. "There's a way," Elder Paro finally admitted, his voice heavy with reluctance. "But it's forbidden for good reason. Tell me," Lycata's words cut like shattered glass. "You would have to dominate your wolf completely, force it into submission, make your will supreme over instinct." He paused. "It would require entering a spiritual realm during an active pregnancy and fighting your wolf directly. Consciousness against primal nature. If you lose, both you and the child die. If you win, if I win, I can carry Grill's child? Yes, but at the cost of enslaving part of your own soul. Your wolf would no longer be your partner. It would be your prisoner, requiring constant domination for the rest of your life." Lycata looked at Grill, saw the grief etched into every line of his face, the hope dying in his eyes with each failed pregnancy. She thought of the 3 lost children buried beneath the garden's oak tree. She felt her wolf prowling inside her, still howling for a mate who'd cast her aside. "Then that's what I'll do," she said quietly. "I'll fight." Because destiny had failed her. Her fated mate had abandoned her. And if she had to go to war with her own soul to choose her own path, then so be it. The messenger arrived at Shadowmoon Kingdom, bearing news that struck Alpha Cox like a physical blow. His discarded mate, the female he'd cast out for failing to produce an heir, was alive. Not just alive, but sheltered by Alpha Grill of Blackstone. And she'd been pregnant. Multiple times. Cox's hand crushed the parchment he'd been reading, claws extending involuntarily. Around him, his council chamber fell silent, every wolf sensing their alpha's sudden volcanic rage. "Pregnant," he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "She couldn't conceive for 6 years with me, but she carries another male's child?" Elder Arturo shifted uncomfortably. "The reports say she's miscarried each time, my king. Her wolf knows who her true mate is." Cox rose from his throne, power radiating off him in waves. "The bond cannot be truly severed. She's still mine by ancient law. Grill has stolen what belongs to Shadowmoon. With respect, Alpha, you released her. Cox's snarl cut off the advisor's words. He paced the chamber like a caged beast, possessive fury warring with something darker. Regret, perhaps, or wounded pride that his cast-off mate had found another male worthy of her affection. I released her from her duties. I didn't release the mate bond. Destiny chose us. Her wolf's rejection of Grill's seed proves it. The council members exchanged glances, recognizing the dangerous edge in their king's voice. This wasn't about duty or bloodlines anymore. This was primal, a male who'd thrown away his mate only to discover another had claimed her. Cots composed a formal demand, each word dripping with barely contained threat. He sent it to Blackstone with his fastest messenger, invoking ancient mate law, citing Destiny's claim, demanding Licata's immediate return. Grill's response arrived 2 days later, blunt and defiant. She chose to stay. She chose me. I will not surrender her to a male who cast her aside when she needed him most. Come and try to take her, and you'll find Blackstone ready to defend what we protect. The words ignited something feral in Cox. His advisors, sensing opportunity or perhaps genuinely believing in the righteousness of their cause, fanned the flames. He's violated sacred law, my king, harboring another Alpha's fated mate. The other packs will support your claim. Her wolf rejects him, another added. Her body knows the truth, even if she's forgotten it. She belongs here, with you. Colt stared at the map of territories spread across his council table, his eyes fixed on Blackstone's borders. If Grill won't return her willingly, we'll invoke our right to reclaim her by force. Prepare the warriors. At Blackstone, Licata read Cox's demand with shaking hands. The parchment listed her like property to be returned, cited laws about fated mates and Destiny's claim, threatened war if Grill didn't comply. He abandoned me, she whispered, fury and fear warring in her chest. He cast me out to die, and now he wants me back? Grill stood beside her, his hand protective on her shoulder. You don't have to go. You're not property, regardless of what ancient laws say. But Licata understood the terrible truth crystallizing before them. Cox didn't want her. He wanted to win, to prove that Destiny's claim superseded choice, and her own treacherous wolf, still howling for its fated mate, had given him all the evidence he needed. She was trapped between two males claiming ownership, while her own body remained the battleground neither could control. The fourth miscarriage nearly killed her. Licata hemorrhaged so severely that Elder Paro worked through the night, his healing magic the only thing keeping her heart beating. When dawn finally broke, she lay pale as death. Another lost child added to the growing weight of grief crushing her chest. Elder Paro didn't speak for 3 days after. He locked himself in his study, surrounded by texts so ancient their pages crumbled at his touch. When he finally emerged, his face was haggard, aged by what he'd discovered. There is a way, he said, his voice heavy as stone, but it's dangerous, possibly fatal. He spread forbidden scrolls across the table, their script written in blood ink that still pulsed with residual magic. This has been attempted 7 times in recorded history. 4 ended in death. 2 resulted in madness. 1 succeeded. Barely. Elder Paro's hands trembled. The ritual must be performed during an active pregnancy in the 2nd trimester. You would enter a spiritual battleground where consciousness takes physical form. You would face your wolf as a separate entity and fight. Actually fight, with tooth and claw and will. Absolutely not. Grill stood abruptly. You're describing a death sentence. During the ritual, your physical body will be unconscious, vulnerable. Elder Paro continued. If the battle takes too long, your body could fail from the strain. Your heart could simply stop. If you die in the spiritual realm, you die here too. No. Grill's word cracked like a whip. I'm saying no, Licata. We're not doing this. The pregnancy becomes a ticking clock. Elder Paro pressed on. If you lose, the shock could trigger immediate labor. The child would be premature, unlikely to survive. You could lose both your life and the baby in the same moment. Do you hear him? Grill grabbed Lycada's hands. I love you, not some future family. You. And I refuse to watch you throw your life away on a ritual designed to kill you. I've already lost 4 children. And I won't lose you, his voice echoed through the chamber. Silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. This is my body, my wolf, my choice. Fire flashed in her eyes. It's suicide. It's hope. They stared at each other across an impossible chasm. Please, Grill whispered, his voice breaking. Please don't ask me to watch you die. Lycada took his face in her hands. I'm dying anyway. Slowly. Every failed pregnancy takes a piece of me. Her thumb traced his cheekbone. At least this way, I'm fighting for something. For thus. For the life we want. Minutes passed. Elder Para stood silent. Finally, Grill's shoulders sagged. If we do this, I need every precaution. Every safeguard. His eyes were fierce. And if something goes wrong, you pull her out. I don't care about the pregnancy. You save her. That's my condition, he said. You don't get to die and leave me behind. She saw the terror beneath his anger. The love that made him surrender what he wanted. Her safety. For what she needed. Her choice. Okay, she whispered. When do we start? Elder Pardo's expression was grin. You conceive again. Carry in the 2nd trimester. Then we enter the spiritual realm, and you face your wolf. Lycada nodded, resolve hardening in her chest. She would fight. She would win. Because accepting that destiny, had won, was a death sentence of its own. The 5th pregnancy began in secret. Only Elder Pero and Grill's most trusted advisors knew, their silence bought with the understanding that Cox's interference could destroy their final chance. Lycada moved through the days with grim determination, one hand always pressed protectively to her stomach, the other clenched in constant readiness for the battle ahead. 8 weeks passed. Her wolf prowled restlessly, but hadn't yet attacked. 10 weeks. Lycada felt the familiar agitation building, her wolf recognizing the foreign life taking root. 12 weeks. The nausea intensified, but this time it came with a darker edge, her wolf's rage simmering just beneath her skin. By 14 weeks, Elder Paro examined her with hands that glowed with diagnostic magic. It's time. A child is developed enough to potentially survive, but your wolf... He trailed off, and Lycada felt it too, the critical mass of resistance building like a storm about to break. If we wait longer, your wolf will attack before we can begin the ritual. We do this now, or we lose another child. But he prepared the sacred chamber, ancient runes carved into stone floors, herds burning in braziers that filled the air with acrid smoke. Lycada changed into ceremonial robes, her hands trembling as she tied the sash. This was it, win or die, enslave her wolf, or lose everything. Then the alarm bells shattered the tense quiet. Cox is at the border. A guard burst into the chamber, breathless with urgency. He's brought his elite warriors. He's demanding Lycada's return. Grill's eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising to the surface. Stay here, he commanded Lycada. Finish the preparations. I'll handle Cox. But Lycada was already moving, following Grill toward the fortress gates, despite Elder Paro's protests. She reached the border just as the 2 alphas faced each other in full Lycan form, Grill's massive gray wolf snarling at Cox's midnight black beast, both radiating lethal power. She's mine by ancient mate law, Cox's voice rumbled, barely human. Return her or this ends in blood. She chose to stay. She chose me. Grill's claws dug into the earth. Her choice supersedes any bond fate decreed. Her wolf rejects you. Her body knows the truth. Enough! Lycada's voice cut through their posturing. Both alphas turned as she stepped into the clearing between them, visibly pregnant, her hand protective on her rounded stomach. Cox's eyes widened, something feral and possessive flashing across his features. Grill moved to shield her, but she stopped him with a raised hand. You want to claim me? She looked at Cox, then Grill, her voice ringing with authority born of suffering. You want to decide who I belong to? Both of you will wait. This child will be born. This battle with my wolf will be fought. And when it's finished, when I've won or died trying, there will be no more question about ownership. She stepped forward, her eyes blazing. Because I belong to myself, not to destiny, not to either of you, to myself. The words hung in the charged air between three wolves bound by fate, choice, and the terrible price of both. Now get out of my way, Lycan said quietly. I have a war to win.
Sacred chamber thrummed with ancient power as Elder Paro completed the ritual circle. Lycan knelt at its center, her pregnant belly evident beneath thin ceremonial robes. On opposite sides of the chamber stood Alpha Cox and Alpha Grill, enemies bound by their shared investment in the woman between them. Elder Paro offered Lycan a chalice filled with liquid that glowed like captured moonlight. Once you drink this, there's no turning back. Your consciousness will enter the spiritual realm. What happens there will manifest here, in your body, in this pregnancy. If you lose, I won't lose. Lycan's hands steadied as she took the chalice. She met Grill's eyes, saw his terror and love warring in equal measure. Then, briefly, she looked at Cox, saw something complicated flicker across his face, regret perhaps, or the first stirring of understanding about what his abandonment had cost. She drank. The liquid burned down her throat like liquid fire, and the physical world dissolved. Lycan found herself standing in a vast, empty landscape beneath the blood-red moon, and before her, massive and terrifying in its primal power, stood her wolf. It was enormous, far larger than any natural wolf. Its silver fur rippling with supernatural energy, its eyes blazing with ancient loyalty. Submit, her wolf growled, its voice reverberating through the realm. Return to true mate. Destiny demands it. No, Lycan stood her ground, weaponless except for her will. I choose Grill. I choose this child. Her wolf lunged. Claws reeked across Lycan's spirit form, pain exploding through her consciousness. She screamed, fighting back with nothing but desperate willpower, her hands somehow blocking fangs that tried to tear out her throat. In the physical world, Lycan's body convulsed violently. Blood began to seep between her legs. No, no, no. Elder Para's hands glowed with healing magic, fighting to keep both mother and child alive. Grill gripped Lycan's hand, his own tears falling on her contorting face. Across the chamber, Cox stood frozen, watching the woman he'd cast aside literally tear herself apart for the right to choose her own path. In the spiritual realm, the battle raged. Lycan's wolf attacked again and again, snarling its rejection. Wrong seed. Cox's mate. Destiny cannot be denied. You don't own me, Lycan screamed, somehow finding strength in her fury. Destiny doesn't own me. Cox abandoned us. He chose his crown over us, and I will not spend the rest of my life enslaved to a bond he destroyed. She threw herself at her wolf, grappling with it, feeling spiritual claws tear through her essence. But she didn't let go. Couldn't let go. Because to release her grip was to lose everything. Grill, their child, her future, her right to choose. I choose this. Each word was a weapon, each syllable powered by grief, transformed into determination. You will submit, or I will destroy us both. Her wolf's resistance peaked, its power crushing down on her consciousness. In the physical world, Lycan hemorrhaged severely, her pregnancy threatening to end like all the others. But Lycan didn't break. She pushed back with everything she was. Every loss, every grief, every moment of being told her worth depended on forces beyond her control. She pushed until something fundamental shifted, until her will became stronger than instinct, until conscious choice overpowered fate's decree. Her wolf's eyes widened in shock as it felt itself being dominated, forced down, subjugated. Bow, Lycan commanded, her voice ringing with power she'd never known she possessed. And slowly,
Snarling with fury and defeat, her wolf lowered its head in submission. Lycan gasped back to consciousness, her body stabilizing, the bleeding slowing, the pregnancy holding. Elder Pero slumped in relief, his healing magic finally taking root now that her wolf had stopped fighting. She'd won. But as her wolf settled into sullen, enforced submission inside her, Lycan understood the price. She would have to maintain this dominance every single day for the rest of her life.
5 months later, Lycan's screams echoed through the Blackstone fortress as labor seized her body. Elder Parle worked with steady hands, while Grill gripped hers, murmuring encouragement through each contraction. Inside her consciousness, Lycan felt her wolf prowling, still sullen, still resentful, but held firmly under her dominion. It made no attempt to sabotage this final stage, beaten into submission by will stronger than instinct. When her son finally emerged, his first cry piercing the air, Lycan wept with a relief so profound it shook her entire body. Elder Parle placed the squirming, perfect infant on her chest, and she stared down at the impossible miracle in her arms. The child conceived against destiny itself, carried through force of will alone. "He's beautiful," Grill whispered, his own eyes wet with tears as he touched his son's tiny hand. At the border, where he'd maintained vigil throughout her pregnancy, Alpha Cox received the summons. He entered Blackstone territory under formal truce, his elite guard trailing behind, and was led to the fortress chamber where Lycan sat propped against pillows, her son nursing peacefully at her breast. Their eyes met across the room, former mates bound by a destiny now shattered beyond repair. "You see?" Lycan's voice was quiet but firm. "I carried another male's child to term. I conquered the mate bond's hold. Your claim has no power here." Cox stared at the infant, at the woman who'd fought her own soul to escape fate's decree, and something in his expression finally broke. "I was wrong," he said, the words clearly hosting him. "I thought destiny couldn't be defied. I thought the mate bond was absolute." "It was absolute," Lycan corrected, "until I made it otherwise." In the formal ceremony that followed, Cox released his final claim before witnesses from both packs. "The bond between us, while once sacred, is severed, not by council decree, but by will stronger than any destiny. I acknowledge Lycan's choice and relinquish all rights." He left Blackstone that evening, returning to Shadowmoon alone, forced to accept that some losses cannot be reclaimed through pride or ancient law. Days later, Lycan stood on the Blackstone ramparts with Grill beside her, their son, named Kieran, for a little dark one, cradled in her arms. Her wolf stirred inside her, testing the boundaries of its prison as it did every day, and Lycan pushed it down with practiced dominance. "It never stops, does it?" Grill asked gently, sensing the eternal struggle within her. "No," Elder Parle answered from behind them, his tone grave. "She must maintain control every day for the rest of her life. One moment of weakness, and the old instincts could resurface." Lycan looked down at her son, at his perfect features, and the way his tiny hand gripped her finger with surprising strength. "It's worth it," she said simply. "Every day of fighting, every moment of vigilance, it's worth it." She had proven that love chosen was more powerful than love decreed, that free will could triumph over fate, and that the truest mate wasn't the one destiny assigned, but the one who stood beside you through every loss, every battle, every impossible choice. As Kieran grew, Lycan would teach him what she learned through blood and tears, that the world would try to tell him who he was, who he should love, what destiny demanded. But he had the right to choose, always to choose, because he was living proof that even fate itself could be conquered by a will strong enough to endure the cost.
If alpha intensity, soulmate sparks, and thrilling wolf world secrets are your jam, Subscribe now so you don't miss it. Fresh episodes drop every day, and the twists will have you hooked from the first howl.